The influence of Marcus Tullius Cicero on the development of legal philosophy, particularly in shaping early concepts of natural law, international law, and justice, remains an enduring pillar in legal history. As a statesman, orator, and philosopher of the Roman Republic, Cicero's legal thought deeply impacted Western jurisprudence, providing foundational principles that later contributed to the evolution of the law of nations. His advocacy for the rule of law, the universality of justice, and the moral obligations of states laid the groundwork for subsequent legal traditions, including modern international law. By integrating Stoic philosophy with Roman legal traditions, Cicero championed a legal system grounded in rationality, moral duty, and the shared rights of all people, regardless of their citizenship status. This documentary examines the essence of Ciceronian jurisprudence, tracing its impact on the emergence of the law of nations while exploring its relevance in contemporary global governance. Cicero's jurisprudence is anchored in the concept of ius naturale, or natural law, which he considered immutable, eternal, and accessible to all rational beings. His philosophical works, particularly De Re Publica and De Legibus, articulate a vision of law that transcends mere positive law, the legal statutes enacted by states. By asserting the existence of a higher moral law that binds both rulers and the ruled, he posited that true justice is not dictated by the whims of governments, but is an inherent part of nature, discernible through human reason. In De Legibus, Cicero famously states that law is derived from right reason in agreement with nature, a principle that later became central to Enlightenment-era legal thought. This idea of natural law heavily influenced the development of the ius gentium, or law of nations, a legal framework in ancient Rome that regulated interactions between Romans and non-Romans. Unlike ius civile, which governed Roman citizens, ius gentium was based on common principles of fairness and equity that applied universally. Cicero's emphasis on the moral obligations of states foreshadowed later developments in international law, where legal norms would be established to govern relations among sovereign entities. The Stoic influences in Cicero's works further reinforced his belief in the universality of law. The Stoics maintained that all humans belong to a single cosmic order and are bound by common reason, a view that resonated deeply in Cicero's legal arguments. By integrating these principles into Roman legal discourse, Cicero laid the intellectual groundwork for the notion that legal and moral norms should extend beyond individual states, forming a foundation for global jurisprudence. The concept of the law of nations, or ius gentium, in Roman legal tradition served as an early manifestation of what later became international law. Rooted in principles of fairness and practical necessity, ius gentium facilitated trade, diplomacy, and conflict resolution among diverse peoples within the expanding Roman Republic. Roman jurists such as Gaius and Ulpian later elaborated on ius gentium, distinguishing it from ius civile while reinforcing its role as a legal order applicable to all peoples. Cicero's contribution to the development of ius gentium was particularly significant in establishing ethical obligations among states. In De Officiis, he argues that states, like individuals, are bound by duties of justice and good faith in their interactions. He condemns aggressive wars waged for conquest and instead advocates for just wars, or bellum justum, conflicts undertaken only as a last resort and conducted in adherence to moral principles. This principle laid the intellectual groundwork for just war theory, which later influenced thinkers such as Augustine of Hippo, Thomas Aquinas, and Hugo Grotius. A notable example of ius gentium in action during Cicero's time was the legal treatment of foreign merchants. Unlike Roman citizens, these merchants operated under a legal framework that was not tied to Roman civic privileges, but instead governed by broadly accepted principles of contract and equity. This legal accommodation ensured that commerce could flourish across Rome's vast territories, underscoring Cicero's belief in universal legal principles applicable beyond state boundaries. The fall of the Roman Republic and the transition to imperial rule did not diminish Cicero's influence. Throughout the medieval period, scholars of Roman law, particularly within the Byzantine and Holy Roman Empires, preserved and expanded upon his legal philosophy. The revival of Roman law during the 12th century, particularly through the study of the Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled by Emperor Justinian, saw renewed interest in Ciceronian jurisprudence. Medieval jurists such as Gratian incorporated Cicero's natural law principles into canonical law, emphasizing the moral and divine foundations of justice. His ideas also resonated with Thomas Aquinas, who synthesized Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology to develop the notion of lex naturalis, or natural law. Aquinas, building on Cicero's assertion that just laws must align with higher moral principles, argued that human laws derive their legitimacy from divine law. During the Renaissance and early modern period, Cicero's influence extended into secular political thought. Legal theorists such as Francisco de Vitoria and Hugo Grotius drew upon his ideas to develop foundational concepts of international law. Grotius, often regarded as the father of international law, explicitly cited Cicero's writings in De Jure Belli ac Pacis, where he argued that legal obligations exist between states, even in the absence of formal treaties. Grotius's principles of sovereign equality, just war, and the freedom of the seas echo Cicero's earlier assertions about the moral responsibilities of states under a universal legal order. The relevance of Cicero's legal philosophy persists in modern international law, particularly within institutions such as the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and the Geneva Conventions. The principle that nations are bound by moral and legal duties, first articulated by Cicero, remains foundational in global governance. The UN Charter's emphasis on sovereignty, non-aggression, and the peaceful resolution of disputes aligns with Cicero's vision of a just international order. Cicero's doctrine of bellum justum continues to shape debates on military intervention and humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions, which set standards for the humane conduct of war, reflect the Ciceronian principle that even in conflict, legal and ethical norms must be upheld. The responsibility to protect, R2P doctrine, which asserts that states have an obligation to prevent atrocities such as genocide, also echoes Cicero's belief in moral duties extending beyond national borders. In economic law, Cicero's advocacy for ethical commerce finds modern expression in trade agreements and human rights regulations. The World Trade Organization, WTO, and international arbitration systems, which seek to ensure fair dealings between nations, are conceptually linked to ius gentium, reinforcing the notion that legal standards should govern interactions beyond individual state jurisdictions. Cicero's jurisprudence remains an enduring influence on legal thought, bridging ancient philosophy with modern international law. His vision of justice as a universal principle, accessible through reason and binding upon all nations, laid the intellectual foundation for the law of nations and contemporary global legal frameworks. From the just war doctrine to the principles of sovereignty and human rights, Ciceronian ideals continue to inform legal debates and policymaking in an increasingly interconnected world. As international law evolves to address new challenges ranging from cyber warfare to climate change, Cicero's insistence on moral duty and legal universality serves as a timeless guide in the pursuit of justice and global order.